Welcome back to my channel, where real stories reveal the unexpected and the unbelievable. Today's story is nothing short of shocking. An infuriating tale of power, greed, and betrayal that will leave you questioning just how far some people will go to get their way. Imagine waking up one day to find that everything you've worked for, everything you've built, has been ripped away. Without warning. Without reason. This isn't just a story. It's a battle for justice, for dignity, and for what's rightfully yours. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe, because you don't want to miss stories like this. Stories that are raw, real, and absolutely mind-blowing. I never imagined my quiet life on the farm would turn into a living nightmare. It was a peaceful existence, surrounded by rolling hills and lush green fields that stretched as far as the eye could see. This land wasn't just property. It was my legacy, passed down through generations. Every tree, every blade of grass held memories of my childhood, of my father's hard work, of my family's history. I poured my heart and soul into that land, tending to it day and night, watching the crops grow and the animals thrive. But one morning, as the sun peeked over the horizon, I heard the rumble. A deep, ominous sound that shook the earth beneath my feet. I ran outside, my heart racing, and what I saw stopped me cold. Bulldozers, massive, merciless machines, were tearing through my fields, ripping apart the soil, flattening everything in their path. I screamed, waving my arms, trying to stop them, but the workers ignored me. Their faces were cold, their eyes fixed on the destruction. I ran towards them, my voice cracking, demanding to know who sent them, who gave them the right. But before I could get close, a man in a suit stepped out of a black SUV, his expression smug and condescending. He looked at me like I was nothing, like I was just an inconvenience. "This land belongs to the HOA now," he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "You were given notice. We're developing it for the community." My heart sank. Notice? I never received any notice. My hands trembled as I tried to explain, but he cut me off, waving a stack of papers in my face. Legal documents, stamped and signed. I grabbed them, scanning the fine print, and my blood ran cold. It was all there. Approval from the Homeowners Association, permits from the county, and a date of seizure that had already passed. I couldn't believe it. They took my land. My family's land. Without a word. Without a warning. My mind raced, piecing together the puzzle. The HOA had always been a nuisance, constantly complaining about my old barn, the smell of the livestock, the sound of my tractor at dawn. But I never thought they'd go this far. I never imagined they'd find a loophole, a legal trick to steal what was rightfully mine. As I stood there, watching my life's work crumble beneath the bulldozer's blades, a fire ignited within me. They thought they could walk all over me, that I'd just roll over and accept it. But they were wrong. They didn't just destroy my farm. They started a war. I stormed into the HOA office that afternoon, my fists clenched and my heart pounding. The receptionist barely looked up as I demanded to see whoever was responsible. After what felt like an eternity, they led me to a polished conference room where 3 board members sat, their faces blank, their eyes cold. Among them was the man from the bulldozers, the one who had thrown those papers at me like I was nothing. His smug smile widened as I walked in, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the table. I wasted no time. "How dare you!" I shouted, slamming the documents down in front of them. "This is my land, my family's land. You can't just take it." But they didn't flinch. Instead, they leaned back in their chairs, their postures relaxed, as if they'd done this 1,000 times before. The man with the smug smile finally spoke, his voice dripping with condescension. "You were given notice, multiple times, certified mail even. It's not our problem if you didn't read it." My mind reeled. I never saw any notices. No letters, no warnings, nothing. I argued, my voice trembling with anger and disbelief. But they were prepared. They pulled out receipts, signatures that looked like mine, dates and timestamps that seemed legitimate. I was stunned, my thoughts spiraling. Was this a mistake? Had I missed something? But deep down, I knew the truth. This was no accident. They forged the documents, fabricated the notices, and covered their tracks so perfectly that no one would believe me. This was planned, calculated, a scheme to seize my land for their so-called community development. I demanded answers, but they just shrugged, feigning innocence. "We followed the law," one of them said, his voice hollow and rehearsed. "The land was unincorporated. It fell under HOA jurisdiction. We offered a fair market price, and when you didn't respond, we proceeded with the acquisition." My stomach turned. Fair market price? They never offered me a dime. They never gave me a choice. It was theft, plain and simple, dressed up in legal jargon and buried in paperwork. I felt my chest tighten, my vision blurring with rage. But they didn't care. To them, I was just another obstacle, another stubborn landowner standing in the way of their lucrative development project. And they had the power, the money, and the connections to crush me, without a second thought. I stood there, shaking, as they handed me another stack of papers. "You have 30 days to vacate the property," the man said, his tone flat and emotionless. "After that, you'll be trespassing." My blood ran cold. 30 days. They were erasing my entire life in 30 days. I wanted to scream, to fight, to make them see what they were doing. But they just stood up and walked out, leaving me alone in that cold, empty room. As I stared at the eviction notice in my hands, the reality of it all sank in. They were going to destroy everything. My home, my heritage, my future. But I wasn't going down without a fight. If they thought they could bulldoze my life without consequences, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. I walked out of that HOA office with my mind racing, anger boiling in my veins. They thought they could outsmart me, that I'd just pack up and leave. But they didn't know who they were dealing with. This wasn't just about land. This was about justice, about protecting my family's legacy from greedy, power-hungry thieves. I spent the next few days digging through every piece of paperwork I could find, searching for any loophole, any mistake they made. I barely slept, my eyes burning from reading line after line of legal jargon. But then, buried deep within an old property deed, I found it. A clause stating that any sale or transfer of the land required the consent of the original owner or their direct descendants. They didn't have my consent. They never did. Hope surged through me like electricity. This was my weapon, my chance to fight back. But I needed help. I needed someone who could turn this tiny shred of hope into a solid legal case. So, I called the best property lawyer in town, an old friend of my father's who knew the history of my land inside and out. When I showed him the clause, his eyes widened. "This changes everything," he said, his voice firm. "If they didn't get your consent, the acquisition is illegal." Relief flooded over me, but it was quickly replaced by determination. This was just the beginning. The HOA had money, influence, and a team of lawyers who'd do anything to win. But now, I had the truth on my side. We filed an injunction the next morning, halting all construction on my property. I'll never forget the look on that man's face, the one with the smug smile, when he showed up with his bulldozers, only to find a court order nailed to my fence. His anger was palpable, his hands clenched into fists, but he was powerless. For the first time, the playing field was level. But the battle was far from over. That night, I received a call from a blocked number. A cold, emotionless voice warned me to drop the lawsuit if I knew what was good for me. I hung up, my heart racing, but I refused to be intimidated. They were scared, desperate even, and that meant I was winning. But I knew then that this was more than just a legal fight. They were willing to do whatever it took to keep my land, and I had to be ready, for whatever came next. The days that followed were brutal. The HOA's lawyers fired back with countersuits, false accusations, and smear campaigns, painting me as an uncooperative, bitter landowner who refused to move forward with progress. They went after my finances, digging into my past, trying to find any dirt they could use against me. But I stood my ground, attending every hearing, countering every lie with the truth. The community was divided. Some supported me. Others were swayed by the HOA's promises of new parks, shopping centers, and increased property values. But I wasn't fighting for approval. I was fighting for my home, for my family's legacy. And no amount of money or influence would make me back down. The courtroom was tense, filled with murmurs and whispers as the trial began. I sat at the front, my lawyer by my side, facing the 3 HOA board members who had stolen my land. They looked confident, smug even, surrounded by their expensive legal team. But I was ready. We presented the deed clause first, showing the court that my consent was never given, that the transfer of land was illegal from the start. The HOA's lawyers tried to dismiss it, arguing that the clause was outdated, irrelevant in modern property law. But my lawyer countered with case precedents, proving that the clause was still binding. The judge listened intently, his expression stern, his eyes fixed on the papers before him. For the first time, the board members looked nervous. Then, we unveiled the forged documents, the fake signatures, the phony certified mail receipts. I watched their faces pale as the handwriting expert testified, confirming that the signatures were forged, that someone had deliberately faked my consent. The courtroom erupted in gasps. The judge's gaze hardened, his voice cold as he questioned the HOA's lead lawyer, who stumbled over his words, trying to spin excuses. But the evidence was damning. They'd gone to great lengths to cover their tracks, but they never expected me to fight back. They never imagined I'd bring their lies into the light. The truth was out, and the courtroom could feel the shift. The power was no longer in their hands. But just when it seemed like victory was within reach, they played their trump card. They called a surprise witness, a man who claimed to be a former employee of mine, testifying that I'd agreed to sell the land months ago, that I was only backing out because I didn't get the price I wanted. It was a blatant lie, but the story was convincing, detailed, rehearsed. My heart sank as I saw the jurors' faces shift, doubt flickering in their eyes. I wanted to scream, to expose him for the liar he was. But my lawyer squeezed my shoulder, urging me to stay calm. We knew this was coming. We knew they'd try to discredit me, to twist the narrative. But we also had a plan. During cross-examination, my lawyer tore apart the man's story piece by piece. He presented time-stamped photos proving the so-called meeting never happened, pay stubs showing the man was fired months before the supposed conversation. Under pressure, the man's confidence shattered, his lies unraveling before the court. He finally broke, admitting he was paid off by the HOA to testify against me. The courtroom fell silent, the air heavy with shock and outrage. I looked at the board members, their faces pale, their composure cracking. They were exposed, their corruption laid bare for all to see. But I knew they wouldn't give up that easily. This was about more than just my land. It was about their power, their control over the community, and they'd fight to keep it, no matter the cost. The trial dragged on for weeks, each day more exhausting than the last. The HOA fought ruthlessly, twisting facts, manipulating testimonies, and throwing every legal trick they could find at me. They were desperate, determined to win at any cost. But we kept pushing back, exposing their lies one by one, tearing apart their fabricated evidence. The community watched closely, the courtroom packed with neighbors who were once on the HOA's side, but now looked at them with suspicion, even disgust. I could feel the tide turning, the truth resonating with people who were starting to see the corruption beneath the shiny promises of new parks and shopping centers. But victory still felt far away. The HOA was powerful, their influence reaching far beyond that courtroom. Then, something unexpected happened. A whistleblower came forward, an insider who had worked for the HOA's legal team. She couldn't stay silent any longer. Not after seeing the lies, the deception, the bribery. Her testimony was explosive. She revealed secret emails, recorded conversations, and internal memos detailing the entire scheme, from the forged documents to the paid-off witnesses. She exposed how they'd targeted my land specifically, knowing it was unincorporated and vulnerable, and how they planned to flip it for massive profits once they got me out of the way. The courtroom was stunned. Even the judge seemed shaken as the evidence piled up, each piece more damning than the last. It was undeniable now. The HOA wasn't just greedy. They were criminals. I watched the board members' faces crumble as their empire of lies collapsed around them. Their smug arrogance was gone, replaced with panic and desperation. They tried to discredit the whistleblower, accusing her of fabricating evidence for revenge. But her credibility held firm. She had dates, times, documents that matched everything we'd uncovered. The HOA's legal team looked defeated, their defense crumbling under the weight of the truth. But just when I thought justice was finally within reach, they made one last move. A settlement offer. They promised to return my land, cover all legal fees, and pay a massive sum in damages if I agreed to drop the case and keep the details confidential. It was tempting. After months of stress, financial strain, and sleepless nights, I could walk away with everything restored and more money than I ever imagined, but I couldn't do it. This wasn't just about my land anymore. It was about standing up to corruption, about holding the powerful accountable. If I took the money and stayed silent, they'd keep doing this to others. Families who didn't have the resources or the courage to fight back. I refused the settlement, my voice steady, my resolve stronger than ever. The courtroom was silent, everyone waiting to see what would happen next. The board members looked stunned, their last hope shattered. They knew they were finished, and I knew that whatever they threw at me next, I'd be ready. This wasn't just my fight. It was a battle for justice, for truth. And I was willing to see it through to the end. The final days of the trial were explosive. The HOA's lawyers were out of tricks, their defense shattered by the whistleblower's testimony. They tried to shift the blame, pointing fingers at each other, claiming they were just following orders. But the evidence was undeniable. Emails showed they'd coordinated the entire scheme, from forging my consent to paying off witnesses. The courtroom was packed, the tension thick as the judge delivered his verdict. He condemned their actions as blatant fraud, their abuse of power as unforgivable. The HOA was ordered to return my land immediately, restore every inch they'd bulldozed, and pay substantial damages for emotional distress and financial losses. I felt a wave of relief crash over me. My knees weak as I finally heard the words I'd been fighting so hard for. Justice is served. But the victory was bittersweet. The community was left divided, neighbors turning against each other as the truth came out. People who once supported the HOA now felt betrayed, angry at how easily they were manipulated. Friendships were broken, trust shattered. The shiny promises of new parks and shopping centers were gone, replaced with lawsuits and investigations. I returned to my land, standing at the edge of the torn fields, the scars of the bulldozers still fresh in the soil. It was a bittersweet sight. My home was mine again. But the damage was deep, the pain still raw. I ran my fingers through the dirt, feeling the connection to my ancestors, the history that nearly slipped away. I made a silent promise to rebuild, to restore what was taken, no matter how long it took. Then, one evening, just as I started clearing the debris, a familiar black SUV pulled up. The man with the smug smile stepped out, his face pale, his eyes hollow. He walked towards me slowly, his shoulders slumped, his arrogance completely gone. For a moment, we stood in silence, surrounded by the ruins of what he tried to steal. "I never meant for it to go this far," he said, his voice low, almost broken. It was just business. I didn't realize what it would cost. His apology was hollow. Too little, too late. But I looked at him. Really looked at him. And saw a man whose greed had consumed him. Left him with nothing. I didn't feel anger anymore. Just pity. He turned to leave. But before he got into his SUV, I called out, "You took more than just land. You took trust, community, and peace. I hope it was worth it." He didn't reply. He just drove away, disappearing, down the dirt road, leaving behind the mess he created. The days that followed were hard. Rebuilding the land, restoring the crops, repairing the damage. But slowly, life returned. Neighbors who once opposed me came to help, bringing tools, seeds, even meals. They apologized, ashamed of how easily they believed the HOA's lies. We worked side by side, mending more than just the soil. We rebuilt trust, reconnected as a community. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick, but step by step, we healed. The land flourished once more, green and alive, just as it was before. But something was different now. It wasn't just my land. It was a symbol of resilience, of standing up against corruption, of fighting for what's right. And I knew that no HOA, no amount of power or greed, could ever take that away again. Months passed, and life slowly returned to normal, or at least a new version of normal. My farmland was healing, the crops sprouting green and vibrant, a testament to resilience and rebirth. The community, once divided by lies and manipulation, began to reconnect, coming together to rebuild what was almost lost. I stood at the edge of my property one morning, watching the sun rise over the fields, its golden light spilling across the land that had been saved by truth and courage. But even as life moved forward, the scars remained. The battle with the HOA left a mark, not just on the soil, but on our trust, our unity. People were more cautious now, more aware of the dangers lurking behind friendly smiles and polished promises. The fallout from the trial was massive. The corrupt board members were removed, their reputations destroyed, their power dismantled. Investigations uncovered years of unethical practices, fraudulent land grabs, and illegal deals. Lawsuits poured in, neighbors demanding justice for their stolen properties and violated rights. The HOA itself was dissolved, its funds seized, its influence wiped out. It was the end of an era, the fall of an empire built on greed and deception. Yet, even in their defeat, they left behind a warning, a reminder of how easily power can corrupt, how greed can tear apart even the strongest communities. But we learned, we grew stronger, and we vowed never to let it happen again. One evening, as I closed the gate to my property, I saw a young couple standing by the road, looking at the land with curious eyes. They introduced themselves as new residents, eager to start fresh, to build a life in a community that had faced so much and survived. We talked for hours, sharing stories, laughter, and hopes for the future. They asked about the battle, the trial, the scars still visible on the land. I told them everything, not just the pain and betrayal, but the courage, the unity, the fight for justice that saved our home. I saw their eyes widen, their admiration clear, and I realized that this story wasn't just mine. It belonged to all of us, to everyone who stood up, who fought back, who refused to be silenced. In the end, it wasn't just about the land. It was about community, legacy, and the power of truth. It was about standing firm when everything you love is threatened, about fighting not just for yourself, but for everyone who came before and everyone who would come after. As I watched the couple walk away, hand in hand, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in a long time. My land was safe, my family's legacy was protected, and our community, though scarred, was stronger than ever. We faced greed, corruption, and betrayal. And we came out the other side, more united, more resilient. I looked at the fields once more, the sunset painting them in shades of gold and crimson, and I knew that no matter what happened next, we would be ready. We had faced the worst and won. In the end, justice prevailed. But the journey left us forever changed, stronger, and more vigilant. Greed and corruption may have threatened our home, but courage and truth brought us back together. This story isn't just about land or legal battles. It's about standing up against injustice, about fighting for what's right even when the odds are stacked against you. Remember, power lies not in wealth or influence, but in truth, unity, and the courage to fight back. If you ever face corruption or betrayal, know that your voice matters, that justice is worth the struggle. And never forget, standing together, we are unstoppable. Thanks for staying with us through this emotional and powerful journey. If you found this story inspiring, don't forget to subscribe for more real-life tales that challenge, inspire, and remind us of the power of truth and justice.